Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We will get this started in about 1 minute. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar presented by the National Cooperative Business Association. For more than 100 years, this association's mission has been to develop, advance, and protect cooperative enterprise to build a better, more equitable, diverse, and inclusive economy. Today, we'll be discussing the critical provisions within the recently passed American Rescue Plan that presents specific opportunities for cooperative businesses. Our panel will address this issue, among others, and comment on this legislation's historic investments in socially disadvantaged farmers and their communities. I'm John Torres with NCBA CLUSA, and we are delighted to have you with us today. Now, before we get started, just have a few housekeeping notes. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes. Your audio is muted during this webinar, but we still want to hear from you. So if you have a question, please type it into the question box located in your GoToWebinar control panel, should be on the right side. We'll be monitoring that question box during the presentation, and we're going to do our best to get to as many of those questions as possible during the Q&A portion of the program. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on our website, ncbaclusa.coop, and also shared via email to all those who have registered for this webinar. Now, to get the conversation started, I'll turn it over to our moderator, NCBA CLUSA's President and CEO, Doug O'Brien. Doug?
Hello, everyone. There it is. There's my camera. Thank you, John. And thanks, everybody, for joining us on what is a rather short notice webinar. Things, of course, are moving quickly in Washington, D.C. this week, and we wanted to make sure to be able to share some of this critical information, even as we're still learning about some of the provisions within the bill with the cooperative community. I just have a couple brief comments, and we look forward to hearing from our panelists, and then our Director of Government Relations, Kate LaTour, will round out the panel with some comments on some specific provisions that affect cooperatives and small business, foreign assistance, and a few other spots. What I wanted to just mention was just how historic this bill is. Folks have been tracking and reading about this $1.9 trillion bill. There's resources in there, of course, to focus on the public health aspects of COVID-19, as well as to help families weather this economic moment. There's quite a few resources in there for small businesses, including co-ops, and Kate's going to be talking about that in a little bit. Co-ops are eligible for this assistance. There's some other resources that I think we as a cooperative community really need to think about how we might be able to leverage to make sure to advantage the families, the businesses, the communities where we are. New resources in terms of the local and state resources, some of their budgets will come back into a place where they can invest in small businesses, in cooperatives. There's some resources within the Department of Treasury that focus on regional and development resources that we're looking at that could be invested into co-ops. And a topic we're going to talk a good bit about today is resources that are going to build the capacity and provide technical assistance for socially disadvantaged farmers. A historic investment, commitment by the White House and by Congress with these communities that we're going to have a chance to talk to in a little bit. And I'll just mention that in those resources, one of the express authorized uses of the resources is for cooperative development. So I want to move to a conversation with our panelists, and then we'll have time for questions. As John mentioned, please drop the questions in the comment section, and then we'll have a chance to have that conversation with our panelists. So first, I'd like to hand this off to Brandon Honeycutt, who is a veteran of the Hill and is most recently serving as the Senior Ag Policy Advisor for Senator Raphael Warnock of Georgia. So Brandon, please turn on your camera and join us. Thanks so much for making some time this afternoon on what is a terrifically busy week.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Doug. I really appreciate that. And good afternoon to everyone on the webinar. It's an honor to be here today. Like Doug said, this has been an incredibly historic and busy week. That notion of it being a busy week is a little bit more extreme for me, given that this is also my first week on the job with Senator Warnock's staff. I most recently jumped over from the House Agriculture Committee, where I served as a subcommittee staff director there, working on specialty crops, horticulture, and research issues. Before that, I was with the office of Congressman Jimmy Panetta from the Central Coast of California and worked with him on the 2018 Farm Bill. And then before that was at USDA at the end of the Obama administration in the Office of Congressional Relations. So have always been in this ag policy space. I'm a native North Carolinian, born and raised, and worked on my grandfather's produce farm growing up. So this is something that's always been familiar to me, and it's an honor to be able to work on these issues for Senator Warnock. So speaking about the senator, on the campaign trail, the senator heard from a tremendous amount of Black farmers in Georgia who had faced discrimination by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. When having these conversations with producers in the state, he realized and got to have a better understanding of just the systematic problem that this presented, particularly for Black producers and producers of color, which had impacted their ability to have thriving economic businesses, as well as threaten their land tenure and access to land. So whenever he was fortunate enough to be victorious in his election and to be sworn in to the United States Senate, he really wanted to take that opportunity to center the needs of those producers, those Black producers and those producers of color who he had heard and learned so much about when traveling across the state. And I think it's particularly important to talk about the fact that he was engaging with these producers at a time when those systematic issues and the challenges that they were facing were being exacerbated by the disproportionate impacts of COVID-19 on these communities of color. So through those conversations and engagements, he realized that this was a population and a group of folks back in the state who really needed some assistance. And frankly, it was long overdue. So thankfully, Senator Warnock was victorious, along with Senator Ossoff from Georgia, which helped deliver that majority in the Senate. He was then appointed to the Senate Agriculture Committee, which allowed for some pretty historic representation, not only for the South generally for his position, but also just for the Black farming population to have Senator Warnock on that panel. As well as thinking about this from a Georgia perspective, we've got Mr. David Scott on the House Agriculture Committee and Mr. Sanford Bishop on the House Appropriations Subcommittee, really sort of amplifying the role that these representatives and senators from Georgia have in Congress when it comes to agriculture policy. So Senator Warnock got right to work. He introduced the Emergency Relief for Farmers of Color Act, which would have done a whole host of things, including providing debt forgiveness on direct and guaranteed loans for producers of color who have historically suffered that discrimination at the USDA, as a way to attempt to begin to sort of deconstruct that systematic issue and to provide some relief to these producers. But recognizing that these producers have faced a long history of discrimination, that was just step one. That legislation also included $1 billion in additional investments for these producers, focusing on that capacity building and technical assistance that Doug mentioned. That host of sort of programs included in that created the establishment of an equity commission to do a full review of the U.S. Department of Agriculture to see ways in which Black producers and producers of color were still being discriminated against today, and ways in which the department could better serve those producers. It also provided resources focusing on land tenure issues, cooperative development, like Doug mentioned, financial, legal, and technical assistance for these producers, as well as investments in 1890 historically Black universities and other minority-serving institutions to try and increase the capacity for education, research, cooperative extension, as well as scholarship opportunities for students from these rural communities. So this was a pretty historic piece of legislation that Senator Warnock introduced, and we were really fortunate to have him in this position to push hard and to get it included within the American Rescue Plan Act that was signed into law this week. So I think there are people on the line who can talk more about these provisions in more detail as they apply to the membership here. But just know that this is something that we are incredibly excited about. The senator has really been able to hit the ground running. And I think that I have to say thank you to the stakeholders who are on this call and to this community who has rallied behind the senator and really helped us champion these issues. This would not have been possible without you all's assistance to make sure that we got the policy right. And now looking forward to make sure that we get the implementation right. USDA is going to have these resources, and we have to work with the department to make sure that they're quickly getting that debt relief out the door, and that $1 billion in investments to these producers is being spent in a way that is smart and make strategic investments in these communities to try and meet the needs of these producers who have been essentially left behind by the department. So Doug, I thank you so much for the opportunity to be on this call. Look forward to hearing from my other panelists and to any questions that folks may have.
Hey, Brandon, please stay on, keep your camera on. I'd like to just ask you maybe one question, and your last comments really kind of forecast what I was thinking about. Given that there is this sort of truly historic investment, throughout the country, particularly we're talking a little bit about the socially disadvantaged farmers right now. You've been down at the department, you've worked on the Hill now for a number of years, you've been through a farm bill, you've seen how the department and the Hill kind of interact. For this group, which is primarily cooperative stakeholders, and we're thinking about how can we partner, how can we make sure that the department is able to work with the cooperative development community to make sure that we create the most economic opportunity possible for these targeted communities. Can you talk a little bit about the bill is now passed, now the department's doing something, how do we as stakeholders most effectively engage?
I think that's a really good question, Doug, particularly timely given where we're at in this process. I think Secretary Vilsack is going to have a really long to-do list. It's particularly getting out of the gate. He's still dealing with the impacts of COVID-19 on the agriculture supply chain. He's now got these resources that he needs to implement. I think where stakeholder communities can be really effective here is providing strong recommendations and coalitions that support and rally around some strong recommendations as to how the secretary can spend this pot of money. I think the debt relief piece is fairly straightforward. They've got those resources, they've got that data, they know which producers are going to be able to qualify. I think the real test will be for that $1 billion pot in additional assistance. And I think that that's where the secretary is going to need to hear input from folks like you who are on the ground and engaging with these producers and are providing these economic opportunities in rural communities. Quite frankly, you all know how these programs work better than anyone. And I think providing recommendations that a strong coalition of stakeholders can rally around to the secretary provides him a really clear and solid path forward for how to make the most of these investments. So I think having conversations like this out of the gate to make sure that members understand what was in the bill and where they can best engage moving forward is going to be really helpful for making sure that this money's spent in a way that makes sense.
That's really helpful. I really appreciate that, Brandon. And I think you can hang around for the rest of the hour. Is that true? Okay, awesome. Okay, excellent. So we're going to pivot to Cornelius Blanding, and Cornelius, I know we were testing some technology. There he is. Hello, Cornelius, and I'm going to introduce you in a second. I'm going to pick up on a point that Brandon made as we're moving to Cornelius. We're at a really important moment. Certainly at the Department of Agriculture, which what we have been talking about, we're going to talk about, but also in some other agencies that this bill actually provides these agencies in different provisions a lot of discretion. And these new cabinet members, these new political staff, the senior staff there are in the process of determining how to implement. There's ways that can make sure that co-ops have a better ability to participate in the programs. And so it's a really important moment for the cooperative community to be engaged with the different agencies. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and even the work that we're doing at NCBA CLUSA. But I want to go to Cornelius Blanding. I'm guessing most folks on this call know Cornelius is the executive director of the Federation for Southern Cooperative Land Assistance Fund, and is a board member of NCBA CLUSA, a longtime board member, and is truly, one of, if not, the great leader for Black farmers, and carrying through that legacy of the Federation of Southern Cooperatives for 54 years. So Cornelius, thanks for being with us today. I know it's a busy week for you too, and let's hear from you.
All right. Well, Doug, first of all, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you and NCBA for hosting this kind of session, this hearing, so our folks can hear about the issues. I look forward to having these conversations with my fellow panelists. Brandon, thank you for your comments. They were right on. Definitely have to thank the Senator, Senator Warnock, for his leadership on the Emergency Relief for Farmers of Color Act, which is the main part of this American Rescue Plan. But as you mentioned, there's others, Congressman Scott, as well as Congressman Bishop in Georgia, who worked closely over the years, worked closely with Senator Warnock, but over the years have put in a lot of time on these issues that have led up to some of this. Brandon, before I start, I want to make sure that I follow up on a couple of your comments in reference to the $1 billion specifically, and talking about the challenges, and it will require all of us understanding and rallying behind the Secretary and making sure that we provide recommendations and support those recommendations. But I want to caution us to not be too careful around the $4 billion. It is straightforward in terms of debt relief, but with our history, things that are straightforward aren't always as straightforward. And so we hope that as we look at the vehicles to distribute these resources through, we really think careful about them. As you know, as many know, that there was a Black farmer lawsuit, a historical lawsuit that pointed to discrimination at the Farm Service Agency within USDA. But that discrimination primarily happened on the local levels. So as we're looking at this the distribution of these $4 billion for debt relief, how that is carried out, how to distribute it matters also. And we have to be extremely careful that we don't carry it out through a institution or through a level that further discriminates, or even if it just has the appearance, because trust is going to be an important part of this in terms of if Black farmers trust that this relief is truly going to happen and come, and who it comes through. So I just throw that out. But as Brandon mentioned, that there's been discrimination against Black farmers, as Reverend Senator Warnock found out in Georgia, but it has happened nationwide. There's been, and it's prevented their ability from having a lot of successful and thriving businesses. And as Brandon mentioned, it has threatened land tenure. So there's a huge problem of Black land loss. And all that was just exacerbated by the pandemic, again, as Brandon mentioned. So I would definitely reiterate those things that Brandon talked about. But there are some persistent challenges that Black farmers face and have faced historically, whether it be Black land loss, particularly dealing around issues like heirs property, which is a common problem in our community and in the Black farming community, their access to fair and equitable credit, which again was the crux of this whole lawsuit in terms of Black farmers being discriminated against and trying to access and get fair and equitable credit. And that discrimination overall, whether it be in the credit market or whether it be just in terms of some of our laws that are set up. Heirs property is a creature of the state. These are state laws, And primarily in the South, where discrimination has been rampant and historical, heirs property is just an offshoot of that. And these heirs property issues have caused a massive amount of land loss in our communities, coupled with discrimination, lack of access to credit, and other things. And right now, the Black farming community is extremely fragile because of those past discriminations, this past history. Farmers are aging out. Many farmers are 65 or older on the average age. You have many of these Black farmers who are operating on less than 100 acres. And so it's extremely hard to get at scale. And at the crux of this meeting, that scale is sometimes and best achieved by organizing co-ops. That's something we as the Federation have been doing for 54 years. Our goals, our focus is around three things: cooperative economic development, land retention, and advocacy, which hits at the heart of this conversation today. How do we make sure that Black farmers have the scale they need, and especially Black farmers who are smaller operators dealing in that 100 acres or less market, and some who are bigger? How do they pool their resources? How do they work collectively and cooperatively with others to access markets, reliable and profitable markets? And how do they maintain their land base so they can pass it down to future generations, so that we maintain wealth in our communities to guard against this discrimination and these historical wrongs that have happened and continue to happen? And last but not least, how do we make sure that farmers are really having a fresh start? And that $4 billion that Brandon talked about as a part of the American Rescue Plan, that starts a new chapter. That gets rid of a lot of this debt that was created because of cumulative effects. The Secretary of Agriculture was on this morning on CNN, and he talked about it. He said it brilliantly about how this isn't about compensating for past acts. The Black farmer lawsuit and some other things did that. It compensated for specific acts. But this American Rescue Plan is looking at the consequences of those acts, the consequences that have led to loss of Black land, the consequences that have led to the lack of access to credit, that have led to these businesses that haven't been able to be as successful as others, that have led to so many things, including the loss of Black farmers in this country. And so it's about time that we start looking at those things. This legislation that really started out when there was conversations around the Justice for Black Farmers Act, which then came to Senator Warnock, and we praise him and the other co-sponsors for that Emergency Relief for Farmers of Color Act that led to the reconciliation bill that the House Ag Committee passed, and now to this historical, symbolic, and forward-looking American Rescue Plan. But all of those things are needed. It's about time. Hopefully they are able to address some of these persistent challenges. And more importantly, they hold the potential to really put Black farmers on an equal footing, or give them a fresh start, if you will. Also, it helps us starting to clear these titles, starting to make sure that succession planning is happening, and so that Black farmers are able to maximize the potential of their land. And more importantly, they start trusting in the system again, and a system that all farmers rely on. They rely on the Farm Service Agency, many of them, for credit. They rely on the programs and resources of the country to make sure that we're playing an active role in the food system and the environment. And it also creates opportunities for cooperatives. One in particular that we're extremely excited about is a Black farmer financial institution, a cooperatively owned institution owned by Black farmers so that they can lend to themselves. No different than farmers are doing as part of the farm credit system. And so there are many opportunities in this legislation. We look forward to them, not only to the $4 billion debt relief, which is needed and is timely, but also that $1 billion worth of support and technical assistance, as long as we're making sure that we're putting it in the right vehicles to make sure that it gets out in a timely manner. But we must also understand that this is going to be a process. There's going to be structures that are going to have to be set up. And so with the Secretary of Agriculture at the helm, he's the right person, I think, at the right time because of his understanding of this department, his history with it. And he comes to this day one being able to run and move forward. But it's going to take time to get these things in place. We got to make sure they're in the right agencies, the right vehicles are set up. And those are the things that we're going to have to make sure that we're providing the kind of recommendations and support on. But we also got to make sure that we have some patience while this is rolled out.
Cornelius, thanks for that context, and I want to pick up on your on some of that last comment. And it's kind of related to what we talked with Brandon about too, is like how to engage the department, how to engage agencies at this point. But I want to the Federation for Southern Cooperatives has such a deep and long legacy of helping create cooperatives in the region. What from that experience, as the department and as others think about how to most wisely invest these resources, what types of activities are the most crucial for the federal government to invest in so that farmers can ultimately become economically self-sufficient with their own businesses, using their farm products?
Yeah, so Doug, great question. And I think many of them, if not all of them, are laid out in this American Rescue Plan, one way or the other. And there are there's some room for flexibility within that for the Secretary of Ag to work too. And so it's going to be crucial again that we work with the Secretary of Agriculture to really see where there's some flexibility and where there's some room for interpretation to add onto even the language that's there. But specifically, there's resources in this so that Black farmers, the new and beginning farmers, the next generation, have access to land. That's going to be extremely important. It's going to be extremely important to look at the existing land. How do we make sure that we're looking at the heirs property issue through the relending program and other forms to make sure that Black farmers are able to finally start doing some great succession planning and really secure title so that they can pass it on and so that they can access these resources and others, because that's been a huge problem. This heirs property issue is about succession planning, no doubt, but it's also a challenge in terms of the inability of farmers to access the resources. So this has to be cleared up even for them to access many of these resources. And some direct assistance to farmers and landowners on the ground to really get engaged in all of the resources that USDA have to offer. We have to start looking at our farms, our communities as a holistic picture, looking at not only the products that we grow, but the forests and other things that are related. And how do we look at that in a holistic manner? So direct technical assistance in those ways. And last but not least, money for co-op development. Again, the fact is that the majority of farmers own 100 acres or less, and they have to create scale if they're going to play in all of these other markets. International marketing, also regional and national marketing. There's so many opportunities at the USDA in this country beyond some of the things that we've been able to access now. And cooperatives allow for that scale, but we have to be able to really, truly create, organize, and develop and support cooperatives on a much wider scale. And that's going to require a lot more resources to do multi-year interactions, to look at a number of things, Doug.
Yeah, that's great. That's perfect. Cornelius, thanks for, I mean, you and your team are such experts at doing co-op development in these communities. So those words mean a lot in this context. So hopefully you can hang around for the rest of the hour. Excellent. We'll have some time for more conversation. Actually, I see a couple good questions for you, Cornelius, but I want to hand it over now to Janie Hipp. Janie, feel free to turn on your camera. Janie is a dear friend for longer than she'd like to admit, maybe. But she's one of my mentors. Was one of my professors at the University of Arkansas Law, and then was a colleague during the Obama administration when we got to work together at USDA. She was a longtime director for the Office of Tribal Relations and has worked in Native American agriculture kind of every which way, and actually well beyond Native American. And she can tell us a little bit about the fund where she's the executive director right now, and of course talk about the American Rescue Plan. So Janie, so good to be with you. And I'll just mention we are working with Janie on co-op development issues on Native American land, and there's more information coming out. There's a seminar here coming this summer. But Janie, thanks for being with us today.
Well, first of all, Doug, whenever Doug calls me and says, I've got something I need for you to do, I just show up. And you're making me feel lonely right now because I want to see Cornelius's face and yours while I'm talking, because boring to just look at my own. But anyway, it's a pleasure to be with you all today. I'm thrilled to be talking with everyone today. I look forward to questions. To let you know a little bit about me, I'm a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation. We are in Oklahoma, although my regular home is in Arkansas, except for when I spend some time in DC from time to time. I've known Cornelius for a long time. I've known Doug for even longer, but Doug's introduction of me made me feel really old, so I'm trying to get over that. But I did want to join you all today and just give you a little bit of background on what we are doing around these same issues and the same concerns that Cornelius was talking about, and the same opportunities as we see it happening across Indian country, which is a really expansive space, if you will. And I'm going to give you a tiny bit of background. I could talk about this forever, but I just want to dip your toe a little bit into native agriculture. I'm the CEO of the Native American Agriculture Fund, and one of the companion cases to the Black farmer case that Cornelius was talking about previously was the native farmer case, and it was brought about the same time, and they rocked around in the courts for a really long time, a couple of decades, and same issues that we faced. Black farmers faced as well, and it was access to credit and discrimination in access to credit. And the case eventually got settled, and part of the settlement was to actually create a Native American Agriculture Fund, which I've helped to stand up with our board of trustees, and we've been doing grant making for a couple of years now. We've got over 300 active grants right now across the country. And our focus is business assistance, technical support, agricultural education, advocacy that assists and comes up underneath native farmers and ranchers. But we all know that the fund that we have that came out of that settlement is not enough. And it does not actually address native farmers and ranchers being able to access the programs that are sitting within the USDA portfolio, which is so terribly important to all of agriculture. And so just a little bit of background. That's some about where the fund is and what I'm doing right now. But tribal nations in the US, there are 574 federally recognized tribes. There are over 60 state recognized tribes, and Indian country is actually a federal definition of the land base and the geography of Native America, if you will. And we straddle over 30 states, and we constitute already, according to the National Ag Statistical Service, about a $3 billion a year, enterprise if you collapse all of what's happening in Indian country agriculture. And I think Cornelius mentioned this in his conversation with you. Over half of our $3 billion a year market value is in livestock, but the other half of that is in not necessarily in row crop agriculture. It's in specialty crops. It's in unique grains, it's in orchards, it's in fisheries, it's in extremely unique crops. The other thing I'll share with you is many native farmers and ranchers actually still conduct their practices according to extremely long-standing, sometimes tens of thousands of year-old traditional methods and indigenous knowledge that's embedded in how they do their agriculture. So I'm trying to explain to you all that a lot of the programs that come out into USDA's portfolio to actually sit up under all of American agriculture really are not built for us. We have the Bureau of Indian Affairs that's involved in how we farm and ranch, which is located within an entirely separate department. It's in the Department of the Interior. And so when Cornelius talks about airship property, we have the same sorts of issues in Indian country around fractionated land title. But the solutions for actually fixing for that problem are entirely different. But the problem really presents in the same way. And I think Cornelius and I have lots of overlap in many different areas when we start to talk with each other about how we can all do a better job of making sure that all agriculture and all folks who are really passionate about growing food and tending livestock and creating food products for the US citizens and beyond can actually have every opportunity that they can to actually play in this space and have successful families and successful businesses. One of the other things that is unique, although we do live alongside a lot of other people in very remote places, it's hard to actually get your head around doing one-off individual farmer, individual rancher, successful enterprises when you are extremely remote. I think that issue applies not to just Native folks, but to a lot of folks who live way away from urban centers. And I will tell you straight up, and my belief is that the cooperative model is something we all need to really deeply explore and deeply think about how it can impact folks who don't live, in that immediate place around urban centers, because it's getting harder and harder and harder to actually access infrastructure, access distribution, and access the resources that folks need to stay successful. Sometimes it's even hard to access broadband, which a lot of things depend on, including getting into your markets. There's just layers of problems that I think we can do a better job on, and that's why I'm really excited about the rescue plan, because it is actually laying the foundation for coming out of COVID and the pandemic in a new way. And that is really, it can address longstanding issues that have been involved in the Native agriculture community for quite some time, as well as in the Black farmer and rancher community as well. But we have to set a different foundation, because we can't just go back to the way it was. We have to make this better. And I think that approaching these things with a cooperative thought process in mind is really critical. If you look on the fund's website, you're actually going to see a report that we pulled together and made public in late fall of last year. And it is called Reimagining Native Food Economies. And what we tried to do in that report was to really set a vision for regionally based, collaborative, cooperative infrastructure that cut across everything, cut across livestock, cut across grains, cut across specialty crops, cut across logistics, supply chain, distribution models. And of course, I could always see Doug nodding his head. Yes, embedded in it is a presumption of cooperatives. But I do think that if you take a look at that Reimagining Native Food Economies report we pulled together, you can kind of see where we're coming from with the fund in terms of how at least part of the solution moving forward can be embedded in cooperatives, but also embedded in regional backbone that our producers need. And that backbone exists within the infrastructure piece. So access to land tenure, those things are challenges that Native farmers have to deal with every day. Access to technical assistance, I'll tell you, there's never been enough technical assistance, technical support to sit up under Native agriculture. It's almost been non-existent. One example I have of this is there's a unique federal program that's been around for about 20 years to provide Native extension agents, and there are only 30 in the whole country for 574 tribes across 30 states with 57 million acres involved in agriculture. I think anyone on this call would recognize that that's simply not enough. But I will tell you that I'm excited. I'm excited also about the potential for, as Cornelius mentioned, the potential for cooperative lending institutions. You know, I've seen it over and over and over again. the complexities of actually doing agriculture with native producers because of the different land tenure paradigm that we have to live within, causes folks in the credit arena to shy away from us because they don't truly understand exactly what our land tenure situation is. It is solvable. It is actually doable. People get loans every single day in those spaces. However, it's really, really difficult, and you have to be extremely patient, and you have to have specialized knowledge. I just think we're at that moment in time where, particularly as we move out of COVID and we really start to, as they say, build back better, that we really need to grapple with some of these technically difficult issues and get it right. Let's get it right this time. And I'm excited for doing that. And I'll just kind of leave you with that. We're excited. The fund is doing amazing work. I'm really proud of everything we're able to help Native communities with. But we need USDA, and we need USDA's programs to be as contoured and as accessible to Black farmers and Native farmers and other farmers of color, because they historically haven't been, and we just need to get it right. So thanks, Doug.
Oh, Janie, great comments. I have a quick question for you before we go to Kate LaTour. So we've talked in the questions I asked both Brandon and Cornelius about ideas for the department. There's going to be no shortage of ideas, and it is so important that that they partner with people on the ground. How to engage with USDA. I want to ask you about how to engage on the other side. So the people on this webinar today are mostly the cooperative community and kind of stakeholders that are close to us. It is so important to engage the people on the ground. In this case, it's farmers, and in other cases, it might be small business owners, or others. We as a cooperative community, as you, I think, put it really well, think that there's so much potential and power in the cooperative business model to empower people. But what's the best way? You're so expert and have been doing this, in so many ways, to reach those populations or the communities that sometimes can just be left behind in terms of even sharing the message or getting the input. What are some of those things that the cooperative community should be thinking about to make sure that we're truly inclusive of getting those ideas and including folks?
Yeah, and Doug, the fund is happy to partner with you, and we're going to on a cooperative discussion over the summer. But I think you really raised an important question, and getting to the people who can get us to the farmers is usually the way to do it. I think Cornelius would probably weigh in and say the same thing. When I look at the fund, we don't profess to know every single Native farmer, but we have anchor institutions like the Intertribal Ag Council, like the Indian Land Tenure Foundation. And we also look to our grantees, right? That we've got over 300 now, and they're scattered all over the country, even up into Alaska and into Native Hawaiian communities. So it kind of depends if you're coming at that question as a cooperative or a cooperative support system. If you're in a certain region, you should just give us a holler, and we can put you in touch with the right folks, because there are not only can you reach out to the tribal governments in those areas, and we can show you how to actually surface up where they are, but we also can help you reach out to nonprofits, community development financial institutions, tribal governments, tribal colleges that kind of sit within those communities. And Cornelius probably has a really similar answer to that question. I think that it really is the same. We've got to get to the right people who can get to the right people.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's put really, really well. We've been, I think all of us have been on a path, particularly this past year, at really looking at how we engage and include people with the real focus on systemic racism. We like to think in the cooperative community that we have an advantage as people-based businesses, but the fact is we have to be really deliberate, to include, to reach out, to figure out who to partner with. So thank you for those comments. I'm going to move to Kate LaTour. Thank you so much, Janie. Kate has some things to share about the American Rescue Plan beyond the work that focused on the socially disadvantaged farmers. So Kate, please take it away.
Sure, thank you, and thanks to the folks on the panel before. I really just appreciated those remarks. I will kind of go over most of the small business provisions that are most relevant to co-ops. And so looking at, for starters, a lot of the investment was around plussing up existing programs. So first, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. The American Rescue Plan Act provided $15 billion additional dollars towards that targeted advance. And in this program, advance and grant are used interchangeably. The overall grant application is largely closed, but SBA is taking this targeted approach. For this program, eligibility is based on 2020 recipients of the targeted advance who received less than $10,000. Those folks will be eligible for whatever the difference is between what they received and $10,000. SBA is largely reaching out via email, so I would advise folks to keep an eye out for that on the email that they used for their SBA application. I would also really just use this opportunity to caution folks around phishing scams and other malintended activities. So just keep an eye out for that. For 2021 EIDL advances, you have to meet all of the following 3 conditions: located in a low-income area, demonstrating an economic loss of at least 30%, and have 300 or fewer employees. And then just as kind of a FYI, the loan portion of that, which is not forgivable, but the loans are administered directly by the Small Business Administration, those are still available through the end of the calendar year. Because of the language in the CARES Act, all co-ops are eligible for that program. And I will just note there that some co-ops have reported some challenges working through the EIDL process around informing SBA on ownership structure. And so please reach out if you have any of those concerns. And if you have been denied and are looking to appeal the denial, we're more than happy to try to help in any way we can there. The second big program that has sought to help small businesses through the crisis is the Paycheck Protection Program. The American Rescue Plan provided an additional $7.25 billion for this program for both first and second draws. This program is administered through private lenders, so credit unions, CDFIs, MDIs, Farm Credit, and other banks. And I want to note that this program actually ends right now, March 31st. Knowing that it takes financial institutions about 1 to 2 days to hear back from SBA on those guarantees. I really am encouraging folks, if they are looking for either their first or second draw, to really reach out to those lenders soon. And there is resources on NCBA's website, as well as a lender matching tool on SBA's website to find lenders who are participating. Just a reminder on the second draw for Paycheck Protection loans, those are eligible to businesses who have fully expended their first draw and have fewer than 300 employees and can also show at least 25% reduction across 2 comparable quarters from 2019 to 2020. Like I said, this program is set to close at the end of this month. There is currently legislation. An agreement was reported to have been reached on Capitol Hill to extend it for a couple months, but at this point it does close at the end of the month. One note from the December legislation that I just want to remind folks around the employee retention tax credit. These changes were passed in December, but you can now qualify for the employee retention tax credit even if you've received a Paycheck Protection loan. There are just some safeguards around double dipping. So wages can be applied to either of the programs, but not both. I will put a big asterisk that I am not a tax professional, and I really encourage you to talk to yours for more information on how those might work for your co-op. And as that reminder, currently the federal deadline for filing taxes remains at April 15th, which somehow is about a month away. So I'm just reminding folks about that upcoming deadline as well. One new program that co-ops may be eligible for through the American Rescue Plan is the Restaurant Revitalization Program. This provides $28 billion of grants to food and drinking establishments. It is administered by the Small Business Administration, has some limitations around maximum grant amounts. And these funds are intended to be used similarly how EIDL and Paycheck Protection are used as well. Co-ops are eligible because the way the definition is written, it's about the business you conduct, not necessarily how your business is structured. This is a new program, so SBA is expected to launch, I believe, next month. So we'll be keeping our eyes out to make sure that as it goes with structure and ownership information, that co-ops can fully be integrated into the program. One other kind of renewed program, I should say, is the State Small Business Credit Initiative. This program was actually first established in 2008 after the recession. And in this iteration, as it's renewed, will provide $10 billion to states and tribal governments to leverage about $100 billion in low-cost financing and technical assistance. States can launch a range of programs under this authority, and there are specific carve-outs within the new program, a reauthorized program, to really lean on credit unions, CDFIs, and MDIs to make sure that those community-based lenders are active and participating. And then there's also funds reserved for socially and economically disadvantaged groups, as well as some of those very small businesses with 10 or fewer employees. The bill does have explicit language around mutually owned institutions, which is great for cooperatives. And what's important to note about this too is that each state will administer the program a little bit differently. So I would encourage folks to stay involved with your departments of economic development within your state. A couple other quick notes. There is a significant investment in childcare stabilization and assistance. Similar to the restaurant provision, this is the definition of eligibility is around the service that's provided, not necessarily the business structure. So co-ops will be eligible to participate in those programs as well. And like the State Small Business Initiative, they are administered at the state level. The childcare provisions are administered at the state level. So you'll have to kind of track that through the state agencies where you live and work. I want to make a couple just quick notes around broadband. There is billions in investments toward improving access, which we know many co-ops will have an important role in implementing. And similarly, this also provides additional funds for food supply chain protection to help farmers, nonprofits, and others integral in the food supply chain, including cooperatives, to deal with kind of these ongoing disruptions and making sure that people in need can receive food. And then last but not least, the global response to COVID has gotten some significant funding through the American Rescue Plan, about $11 billion. And a good chunk of the money is around mitigating the public health impacts around the world, but there are also really significant investments towards building food security and economic stabilization, both of which co-ops have a really important role to play there. So in the international funding as well as the domestic funding, NCBA CLUSA is really eager and intending to be active in making sure that these funds can be used by co-ops and that the agencies are investing in co-ops. I think I'll maybe wrap up just by saying this rescue plan is so deeply needed. We continue to hear from our small businesses that there's ongoing assistance needed. So I just want to reiterate our thanks to some of our champions on Capitol Hill, especially including Senator Warnock, Senators Booker and Lujan for their work on the socially disadvantaged farmers, to Chairwoman Stabenow and Leader Schumer, and to everyone's staff for keeping co-ops top of mind kind of throughout. And then just as a summary note, we'll make sure to be posting our information related to co-ops and the pandemic on our website. So check back there or reach out to any of us. Our contact information is all over the place. So we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Kate. And Kate, of course, is the Director of Government Relations here at NCBA Co-op and NCBA CLUSA, and has been working kind of double time as she does a lot of times, but particularly this last week and two. Kate's summary, I think, really indicates just how many pieces of the legislation can impact co-ops viability, the ability to use co-ops, to impact families and businesses and communities. So As we dig more into that, please reach out to us, as Kate just said, and I suspect in the coming weeks we may have some more webinars and conversations like this. And if people are particularly interested in issues related to the AR, please let us know. Okay, questions. We're almost at time, so we're going to go into a lightning round. There's a bunch of good questions here, but I'm going to ask each of the panelists to keep their answer to 1 minute. And I'll warn you, I'm going to go Cornelius and then Janie, and then Brandon. I'm going to ask you to wrap us up. And Kate, thank you very much, but you don't get to talk again. So Cornelius, I think this is a really good question. The $1 billion of technical assistance and capacity building. Go ahead and turn your camera on, Cornelius. And actually, Brandon and Janie, feel free to turn your cameras on too. The question, I'll just, the verbatim says, is this a drop in the bucket, or is this truly, a fairly transformative amount of resources for socially disadvantaged farmers?
First of all, let me say hello to Janie. Janie, it's great seeing you. I love Janie. Janie always says what I try to say and what I hope to say a whole lot better than I can. So, but Doug. So first of all, there's no way you can make up the historic effects and impacts that discrimination and all the other things that Janie and Brandon both mentioned to groups of people. You can't make it up. And $1 billion by no means makes that up. But it's a start. And more importantly, it's a recognition of a lot of wrongs. And I think Janie put it great in terms of really, how do we come out of this recovery? How do we reset? It gives us the opportunity to really start talking about the possibility of resetting our food system, the possibility of resetting the mechanisms that we have in place to protect our environment. We as a country have to soon start realizing that the majority of farmers and landowners are small scale, including farmers and landowners of color. And our food system, our environment is basically goes one way or the other because of them. And they do so much for this country, but receive so little in return. And so this $1 billion, it by no means does it make up anything, but it gives us the opportunity to start these kind of conversations, to push the button, to hit reset, to really start imagining, like Janie said, what do we want the system look like? In my years, I always talk about something simple. I talk about the meals that I love. I say to many folks, when people ask me, what do I like? What food? I talk about barbecue chicken, cabbage, and rice. And Doug, you know this. And I talk about this from the standpoint of that it's a great irony. You have in the South, first of all, this country being the biggest exporter of food, one of the biggest exporters of food. And in the South, you have the top 5 producers of chicken in the South, the top 3 out of 5 of cabbage in the South, the top 4 of 5 of rice in the South. But yet the South is the poorest region in this country. That's irony. And that's because, speaking to those things that Janie mentioned, we don't own small farmers, landowners, communities. We don't own the infrastructure. And this gives us an opportunity to start building those kind of things, building regional infrastructure and supporting small farmers and landowners, Black, Native American, Hispanic, all, to make sure they're part of the solutions to this country. And so I'm excited. It does not by any means make up for all the historical wrongs and all the damage that we've caused, or the cumulative effects, as the secretary put it, but it does begin this conversation. It does begin repairing. It does begin giving us the room to reimagine what that can look like, what our system should look like.
Thank you, Cornelius. Thank you, and thanks for getting the reference into one of my favorite speeches I ever saw, which was Cornelius telling, really moving out on that big message focused on the foods of place. So, Brandon, I'm going to give you a heads up. The question for you, after we talk to Janie for a little bit, is what's next? What's next on the Hill? What's happening? So, Janie. A question that came in about, beyond what we were talking about here with the USDA, the socially disadvantaged farmers, but the really major investments into tribal communities, $20 billion in this relief plan. What are some of those key investments that are going to be transformative, or at least really move the ball forward in Indian country, and the people that you work with all the time?
Well, this bill is going to make a really great run at it. I'll tell you that. But if you look at how COVID hit Native communities, it really shut us down. And our economies are built on just a few components, and because we don't really have a reliable tax base. And so hospitality is a big deal, and it just shut everything down. And so many tribal governments are also employers. They had to, pull back, way back, and it went on for months. And I actually saw it in the food component as well. While this was all happening and jobs were being shed and people were being sent home, the food still needed to go. The food still needed to go to people. And so what I'm seeing in the bill right now, and well, now it's a law, thank goodness. What I'm seeing in it is really kind of, it's not just looking at the tribal specific aspects, because those are substantial. We needed to shore up health, wellness, telehealth, all of those things that were central to COVID, but we also needed to get our economies back up and back open. And those health initiatives and the ability to actually think about the broadband piece. I mean, if you knew how difficult it was to get broadband into Native communities, and I would say remote farming communities have the same issues. So anything around that, anything around utilities infrastructure, it's just the layers of the act are so significant. I can't say it enough, but they're so targeted. And what we saw in Indian country was when everything started shutting down, we still had to feed our people. We still had to go find food, and we had to go find it quickly, because we were trying to make sure that we protected our elders, our language speakers, our young people. And because of the remoteness, the whole infrastructure around moving food around and moving resources around to help people survive was critical. And it was a wake-up call, I think, to most tribal governments. And I think the last article I saw was around 30 some odd billion that was going to go towards tribal governments and really get them getting everything, the engine moving again. But Doug, as well as I do, that tribal governments are also eligible for a lot of things that come out of USDA that aren't just tribal specific, they're rural specific. And so it's really important to look, when we think about this act and how important it is, to think about the breadth of it that sits over where Black farmers live and where Native farmers live, which is rural areas predominantly. And I will tell you, it's really important for us to be thinking, like Cornelius always says, what are we doing moving forward?
Right.
What are we doing to make sure we never do this again? Let's get things fixed.
Yeah,
So,
this is historic.
Since we seem to have lost Doug's connection, I think I will hop in and ask Brandon just to wrap up and see, as Doug mentioned, what you see as next steps, both in implementation here, but also kind of what the Hill is looking at next and what co-ops can expect.
Yeah, Kate, thanks. I think that is a smart thing to do in terms of looking forward. I think we can take today and this week to celebrate this monumental achievement, and then really roll up our sleeves and get to work when it comes to implementation. I thank Cornelius and Janie for their just wise comments when it comes to how this is going to look on the back end with the department and how we can best engage to make sure this money is getting where it's needed quickly and efficiently and in a way that just makes sense so we can build back better. I think looking forward on Capitol Hill, we're getting into appropriation season coming up relatively soon for fiscal year 2022. So I think that's going to be sort of the next really big thing that we've got on our plate, and ensuring that all of these programs that rely on annual appropriations get the recognition that they deserve. Hopefully some of the gains that we made in this past legislation will be carried over in FY22, and we can continue some of those yearly funding mechanisms to get some additional support. And I think the other thing that we're going to be looking at big picture coming up is going to be what a potential package around climate and infrastructure look like. Just this week, Senator Warnock had his first Agriculture Committee hearing, and it was on climate change in agriculture. And this was his first hearing, and he took the opportunity to talk about how are we centering the voices of these historically disadvantaged and discriminated against producers in that conversation. I think that that's a narrative that has not been included to date in this discussion. I think a lot of the focus has been on technology and how do we expand existing programs. But as we've seen in this conversation, a lot of those existing programs just aren't working or aren't accessible or a good fit for a lot of these producers. So we have to keep that in mind. I was delighted to hear the senator bring that up in that hearing, and hope that that will be something that we continue to focus on as we move forward, as the gains that we made in the American Rescue Plan Act are great, and they're going to help sort of maybe try and remedy some of that past discrimination. But now being more forward thinking, how are we pulling in these producers and these rural populations into these more forward thinking legislative actions to ensure that they're teed up for success for the next decade and beyond. So I think that's what we're looking at. It's a big challenge. I think we're going to rely heavily on partners like you all to help us go in the right direction and make sure that we're including the right folks in those conversations. But just really appreciate this opportunity, and thank you all for your expertise and this chance.
Doug, you're on mute, I believe, or your sound is not working. Nope. So maybe I will thank Brandon. I think those are some really excellent summary comments just about, maintaining these relationships with our folks on Capitol Hill and really, taking the time that is deserved to celebrate this big accomplishment, but really looking ahead and keeping the work going. I think if you have not already, you and other folks on the Hill can expect to hear from us on appropriations, but also really centering co-ops in these kind of big challenges around climate and things like that. So with that, unless Doug is able to speak again, okay, then I will give a big thank you to Cornelius and Janie and Brandon for joining us. We know there's a lot more work to do, so we wanted to get some information out there now, but really look forward to working with you all and folks on the webinar going forward. And like we mentioned earlier, we'll have some additional resources on NCBA CLUSA's website, ncbaclusa.coop, but you can always reach out to any of us in the meantime. And with that, I just want to extend, another big thanks to everyone. So take care.
Thank you all.